Hello, bonjour. My name is Mina. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I do a lot of fashion and cultural commentary. I am on TikTok, I'm on Instagram. I have a podcast called Highbrow and an associated Patreon. And today I'm wearing a bicorn hat. As well as a bunch of other hats because we're going to be talking about hats. And thankfully, today is also a day, well, not thankfully, this is not something I'm thankful for, but it just so happens, coincidentally, today I have really dirty hair, really greasy hair, as just an overshare. I just get greasy hair very easily, and because I have dark hair, it's very obvious that something's wrong if I don't shower every day. And for anyone who says that you're just supposed to train your hair to not produce grease, I think that's a lie because I've tried over many years of my life to do that and it's never worked. So now I just shower every other day and I just deal with that. But yeah, anyway, I didn't have time to shower this morning, and so my hair is looking a little bit rough, but it's perfect because I'm just going to be rotating between different hats today, and you'll never know. It's like I had clean hair this whole video. As you guys know, I love reading. I love reading so much that I even made a podcast episode a few weeks ago about how people need to read more. But at the same time, I get into reading slumps every so often, and that's why I'm partnering up with Book of the Month for this video. My reading slumps are usually triggered by decision fatigue. I get overwhelmed trying to find the perfect book to read, and then I get so tired researching I give up altogether. And that's why Book of the Month makes it really easy for me. Their editorial team selects 5 to 7 books each month, mostly written by new and emerging authors. When you're a member, you can choose to order 1 or more hardcovers that get delivered in a pretty blue box like this. Or you can choose an audiobook selection ready to stream via their app, or you can skip the month entirely if you're not feeling it and not get charged. This December, I chose The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan, which is a World War II historical fiction book about Japanese occupation in Malaysia. I picked it because it's a historical setting I'm not too familiar with, and I also love supporting new Asian authors. I also picked out No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall because I find that whenever I'm in a reading slump, the easiest way for me to get back into books is picking up a page-turning thriller. Stop browsing and start reading. Check out bookofthemonth.com, and for a limited time, you can join and get the first book for just $5 with code FORYOU.
Don't wear that hat.
It's September 1922, and the kids are rioting over hats. To give the context, in the early 1900s, men customarily wore hats on a daily basis, and different types depending on the time and place. In New York City, during the spring-summer, they would wear straw hats, and during the fall-winter, they would wear felt hats. The day you changed between hats was May 15th and September 15th. Stockbrokers, who I guess have always had finance bro energy, would playfully smash each other's straw hats, often on the stock market floor on September 15th. They also had the money to replace their hats every season, so the hat carnage wasn't a big deal, in case you were worried about that. The celebratory ritual destruction of straw hats evolved to the point where it became passé and embarrassing if you were still wearing last season's hats in the new season. Men who were late to the change were ridiculed or even had their hats rudely snatched off. So, in 1922, actually a few days before even the end of straw hat season, gangs of teen boys were becoming restless and started harassing boater-donning men and stealing or smashing their hats, and sometimes even maiming them in the process. These attacks and skirmishes went on for not 1, not 2, but 8 days, with mobs of hundreds on the streets. It's giving your unemployed friend on a Tuesday. The New York Times reported on September 16th, gangs of young hoodlums ran riot in various parts of the city last night, smashing unseasonable straw hats and trampling them in the street. A favorite practice of the gangsters was to arm themselves with sticks, some with nails at the tip, and compel men wearing straw hats to run a gauntlet. Many men fought back. One man apparently lost an eye in the skirmish, and consequently, many of these ragamuffin youths were brought to night court in front of Magistrate Peter A. Hatting, yes, that was his name, who handed down fines and some short jail stays, as well as spankings administered by parents coming in to bail out their children. Hatting made the powerful declaration, "It is against the law to smash a man's hat, and he has a right to wear it in a January snowstorm if he wishes." If there's one thing to take away from this story, it's that hats used to be one of the most precious items on a man's wardrobe, precious enough to incite riots. For the modern man, his Helen of Troy was his favorite fedora. Helen Rowland wrote for the Brooklyn Eagle on September 5th, 1922, "The average man's devotion to his hat is one of life's greatest mysteries. It seems to be something sacred in his life, which he cherishes and protects as passionately as he does his dignity, his honor, and his grandmother's memory. R.I.P. He will fight for it, quarrel over it, and risk his life under a motor truck or a trolley car to salvage its remains in a wind. When a boy wants to start a fight, all he does is to snatch another boy's hat, and the battle is on." Today, as a self-dubbed hat enjoyer, I want to talk about hats. People have asked me for fashion advice a lot over the years, and if you're wondering why, you can just leave right now. But my number one advice is to put some headwear on your head, because our culture has become so hatless that the presence of anything perched atop your beautiful head will draw in admirers. An outfit can be elevated from simple and plain to show-stopping with the easy addition of a brimmed fabric. And most importantly, your choice of hat will tell the world everything it needs to know about you as a person. Well, not everything, but it'll tell you more than you think. So today I'm pushing my headwear agenda and dissecting some of the most popular hats in our culture, why they've stayed relevant in a hatless world, and meanings and subversions each hat has had throughout history, as well as showing off and bragging about my own personal hat collection. So I fear we have to start in the Victorian era, as I do with lots of my videos. It's just so easy to place blame on the Victorians because during this time period we got mass industrialization, aka the birth of the fashion industry as we know it today. The Victorians were also very into hats. And with this hat fanfare, it's unsurprising that being a hat maker or a milliner, which is what they were called and are still called, in the Victorian period and early 20th century was a lucrative business. While the business was mostly male-dominated, as many businesses were, it was also one of the limited job opportunities that women were able to venture into. The 1916 paper Millinery as a Trade for Women by Lorinda Perry, Ph.D. of the Women's Educational Industrial Union examines the conditions of female hat makers. So, compared to the garment factories of the time, which were another place in the working world for women, work in a millinery shop demanded a more specialized and complex skill set and offered a relatively higher wage. But it wasn't all peaches and cream. Most milliners worked out of their homes or in shops with less than 5 co-workers, making unionizing nearly impossible. Relations between superiors and inferiors were distinctly friendly and familial, especially in cases of apprenticeship, which further led to the dysregulation of the industry. In addition to this, the work was highly seasonal, flip-flopping from periods of demanding overtime and layoffs. As we know, hats are sadly not that girl these days.
People are not wearing enough hats.
The diminishing of casual headwear was a process throughout the 20th century. Cars are popularly credited as pushing the anti-hat agenda. So in the 1950s, the prevalence of personal cars spread across America in part of Eisenhower's vast highway system. Before personal cars, people relied on public transport, which had a taller head-to-roof height, allowing you to comfortably wear your hat while commuting. But with cars, the head-to-roof difference was shorter, and so most people had to take off their hats, making them more overtly cumbersome. Another reason for why hats went out of style is the overall casualization of fashion, which was triggered by the youth. Over the 20th century, more and more young people were going to college and adopted a casual collegiate style consisting of jeans, shorts, oversized cardigans, sweatshirts, and sneakers. While students still wore hats in the 1930s, by the post-war era, youth culture dictated that headwear was conservative and stuffy. And, as demonstrated by the likes of President John F. Kennedy, we can see how adults clung onto their casual college style outside of campuses, with some eventually saving their formal suits for only special occasions. But this leads us to the question, why is it that some hats have stuck around? Okay, would you guys believe me if I said I don't actually own a beret?
I can't believe it.
Like, this is the closest hat I have to a beret, and I understand it's a baker boy hat, and it's definitely not a beret, but I actually don't own a beret because my issue with berets is I've never been able to figure out how to wear it on my head. Like, there's too many ways that it can sit on your head. Like, there's too much freedom, and I feel like it always just looks a little wrong, so I'm always, like, left adjusting it throughout the day, and it's just too annoying, so I don't own one. And I also feel like my personal preference for beret is something with a little bit of a lift, and a lot of them are just like flat on your head like a pancake. and I don't see the value of wearing a pancake on my head, but that's just me. If you are a beret enthusiast, this section is for you. While the word beret originated in France, surprise, surprise, archaeological and art historical evidence indicates that variations of the beret have been worn by Bronze Age inhabitants of Northern Europe, ancient Cretans, Etruscans, and English aristocrats such as Henry VIII. No one knows exactly how the beret came to be, but there are a few stories out there. According to popular French legend, Noah, yes, the Noah of Noah's Ark, invented the beret. He allegedly discovered that the wool that was used to waterproof the ark had been trampled by the animals into a tough felt fabric, which he then made into a weatherproof hat. Another story postulates that it was medieval shepherds who invented the hat by exposing knitted wool to the weather until it swelled and became solid felt. The beret style we are familiar with today was commonly referred to as the Basque beret because it was the 17th century shepherds in the French regions of Béarn and Basque who are responsible for the beret's popularization in France. Berets also have a deep history as military garb. The first military beret is documented as being the red version that originated with Tomás de Zumalacárregui, a Spanish Basque officer who was captain general of the Spanish army during the First Carlist War, which is 1840. And in 1889, the French military adopted a large floppy beret as part of the uniform for their elite mountain infantry called the Chasseurs Alpins. From then on, the military beret has propped up all over the world in the US, the UK, Ireland, and Scotland, which have different names for their versions of the beret, and in France among resistance fighters. David Long claims that the history's most famous beret moment is the one worn by Michael Fassbender in Inglourious Basterds. I'm just kidding, but I just watched Inglourious Basterds for the first time like a week ago, which I know, but that movie is like 3.5 hours long. And if I wanted to watch a movie that was 3.5 hours long, I have no punchline for that because I've never, ever wanted to watch a movie that was that long. But anyway, I finally watched it. It's hilarious. I actually really like it, but I did not realize that Michael Fassbender is like a kind of like goofy Englishman in it, and he was just like wearing this really funny looking beret. Anyways, not to slander Mr. David Long's credentials, but he claims that the most famous beret moment is the one that Che Guevara wore in his iconic 1960 portrait by Alberto Korda, which has become a global symbol of youthful idealism, student unrest, counterculture politics, and undefined rebellion. The beret's working class history and availability at $1.99 made it the ideal headgear for comrades. $1.99, by the way, not $199. That would not be the hat for comrades. Che's beret look inspired student radicals, Irish Republican fighters, the Basque National Group, ETA, Chicano activists in the southwest of America, among many other beret-donning groups. Another famous look is that of Black Panther leaders Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, who were inspired to adopt berets as part of the Black Panther uniform after seeing French resistance fighters during World War II wear berets in a film. For the Black Panthers, the beret further symbolized their position as soldiers on the front line. Yes, there were functional and political reasons for the way the Panthers dressed, but style was also part of the equation. Yeah, the beret was absolutely stylish, worn as a form of self-expression by civilians in the early to mid-20th century, not just because it was symbolic of military support during war times, but also because rationing made it so other fashion statements were kind of like unavailable. It became a high fashion staple for women in the 1930s due to Coco Chanel's influence, who was famous for taking comfortable men's clothing and adapting it for women. She was also famous for what Time magazine referred to in 1957 as her genre pauvre, or poor look, in which she specifically co-opted working class elements and reinterpreted them as luxury fashion. Berets kind of exist in the intersection of both, as in being menswear and being workwear. Fashion historian Claire Hughes also references Marlene Dietrich's beret as part of her iconic look, leading to its popularity in film and among other Hollywood actresses. Dietrich had a quite uninhibited approach to hats, and milliner Lily Dachet eventually made 50 for the film Desire in 1936, fondly recalling a big dramatic beret with a visor that set a mode for the Paris milliners that year. Throughout the 20th century, the beret has come in and out of style, resurging in the 50s and 60s through the beatniks, which were a group of existential philosophical artists. It's kind of unclear why beatniks chose this beret look, but some probably adopted it because many beatniks were involved with the arts, and the beret has had references to the art world having been worn by the likes of Monet and Picasso. There was also a lot of crossover between beatniks and Marxist scholars, so some could have adopted the black beret as a reference to revolution. And according to Daniel Dallas Hills, American beatniks believed that berets would serve as evidence of a subversive foreign influence. So basically, they just wanted to seem like they were more cultured, and it was kind of just pretentious. And then I'm sure many people also adopted the look because all their peers were doing it, and they wanted to fit in with the current mode. The 1967 movie Bonnie and Clyde was also credited with relaunching the beret as a radical chic fashion statement due to Bonnie's working-class origins. After this movie, berets went on sale in discount stores at $1.99, temporarily restoring, as Edward Mader says, a hatted look to a hatless generation. The beret was repopularized once again among female consumers by actresses in movies in the 90s. This time, the beret changed in size, came in a range of colors, and sat on your head like a painter's beret or dead on in the center. I'd argue that yes, the beret has come in and out of style throughout the last few decades, but it's been largely the same type that people wore in the 1990s. While it might be weird to think that a military hat ended up on the likes of Blair Waldorf's head, there's actually tons of examples of military wear being co-opted by the fashion industry, from trench coats to bomber jackets to camouflage prints. Still waiting for my bicorn hat to take off, personally. Patrizio Califato writes, although it is alarming to think that war is often the inspiration for fashion, the civilian contamination of uniforms does sometimes work as an irreverent parody of perfect men in their perfect outfits. It's interesting that by the 21st century, the beret, which was once a man's hat, has been completely overtaken as a woman's hat. If I had to guess, it's because the beret had become such a notable women's fashion accessory, and by the end of the 20th century, it was too feminine for men who were also sort of socially conditioned now to not care about fashion at all.
Yep, enough of this girly talk.
Theo Coetzer wrote for Habilitate. On the one hand, it has long been the chosen headgear of just about the most manly folks around in the form of soldiers and revolutionaries. And on the other, it's overwhelmingly been the ambit of women's wear in recent decades. Enough so for The Guardian to declare in 2012 that a beret on a man is ridiculous. The beret is just one example of workwear-adjacent men's hat that transcended into becoming a fashion object. The cowboy hat went through a similar trajectory. Most cowboys, or early 1800s English-speaking settlers in the American West who adopted aspects of vaquero clothing style and cattle-driving methods, didn't actually wear cowboy hats. These cattle drivers actually preferred shellacked felt bowler work hats from England. What we now call cowboy hats only became popular among cowboys near the tail end of the 19th century, which was a bit late in the timeline of the Old West to so thoroughly define the era as it does today. According to legend, the cowboy hat, as we know it today, was designed by John B. Stetson, an East Coast hat maker from New Jersey who took a health-seeking trip out west after becoming sick with tuberculosis, the hip disease of the time. Stetson, who was the son of a hatter, was inspired by the water-repellent quality of his felt tent. He then molded a wide-brimmed hat of the jackrabbit and beaver fur fabric to amuse his travel companions on a trip out west. The result, which Stetson dubbed the Boss of the Plains, was an all-weather hat that protected the wearer from the sun and rain, stayed steady on the head even when riding horseback, and, most importantly, looked really fucking cool. Other sources claim that Stetson may not have invented the Boss of the Plains from whole cloth, but was likely influenced by the Spanish-origin brimmed hats he saw on his trip, like the sombrero. The initial Boss of the Plains design, hard-launched in 1865, didn't actually have the iconic dented crown or curved brim that Stetson later added to his hats. Unlike his father, who lived above the hat shop he humbly operated and sold hats that he himself made, John B. Stetson was a girl boss who embraced industrialized production. When hat dealers in Philadelphia didn't take to his new design, he established the sale of Boss of the Plains to customers in the West through mail order. Within a year of these sales, Stetson left the local downtown hat trade to establish a factory on the outskirts of Philadelphia. The popularity of the cowboy hat peaked not with the height of cattle driving business in Texas, but with the popularity of cowboy mythology in 20th century America.
I wanted to be a cowboy, baby. I wanted to be a cowboy, baby.
Romanticized depictions of cowboys from dime store fiction, Italian-produced spaghetti western films turned the cowboy hat from a functional piece of workwear to a powerful symbol of American exceptionalism, masculinity, and individualism. The reality of a cowboy's life is much different than what was presented to audiences of Western novels or films. Cattle herders were mostly poor ranch hands who worked labor-intensive, tedious jobs on the fringes of society. Many of them were formerly enslaved, poor farm boys, or oppressed Native Americans. The vision of the glamorous cowboy was thanks to Hollywood and men like Theodore Roosevelt, who whitewashed the cowboy, elevating him to the epitome of personal freedom, manly courage, and rugged independence. In The Cowboy, America's Contribution to the World's Mythology, historian Marshall W. Fishwick describes the characteristics of the cowboy as an archetype thusly. What of our stock cowboy's personality? You will find him, say his admirers, modest, truthful, brave, enduring, democratic, fun-loving, and highly individualistic. He is the envy of all who believe that a good, clean life in God's outdoors, close to the real things, is desirable. A good man to have with you and a demon when he is against you. A man to be tampered with only when you are reconciled to picking lead slugs out of your carcass on short notice. The mythic archetype of the cowboy was invented by interlopers seeking to find meaning in the West and who were also probably trying to escape the urban chaos and foreign immigrants. While there were some real cowboys and Western residents like Buffalo Bill Cody with his Wild West stage show who played into the popular image and commercialized their personas, many of the pivotal chroniclers of the Old West, like cowboy hat inventor Stetson himself, were actually East Coasters. Who came up with these fanciful ideas of the West on their short vacations, escaping tuberculosis. Some of the most devious reappropriations of cowboy iconography in the 20th century came from none other than 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. The so-called cowboy president was not actually a real cowboy, but he still relied on the strong and silent archetype he played on screen to align himself with masculinity, dominance, laissez-faire individualism, and white supremacist nostalgia. Reagan even took time off in March 1983 to open an exhibition organized by the Library of Congress called The American Cowboy.
Integrity, morality, and democratic values are the resounding themes.
Ironically, the actual job of being a cowboy is not as glamorous as Reagan made it out to be, and he experienced it firsthand. 2 members of the Reagan administration were either injured or killed by horses, and on July 4th, 1989, Reagan himself went to a Mexican ranch, rode on and fell from a horse and injured himself in the fall. Urban women were also susceptible to the cowboy hat and cosplaying Western dress in general as a form of kind of like cottagecore adjacent escapism. Struthers Burt is an owner of a dude ranch in Wyoming, and if you don't know what a dude ranch is, it's like a type of establishment where urbanites will stay at to experience a romanticized version of cowboy culture. Burt wrote that the dude rancher knows that when Eastern damsels put on overalls and wear egregious scarves, they don't look in the least like cowgirls, but he encourages them to do these things because it is good for their souls. The cowboy hat differs from the beret in the sense that while women have also adopted the accessory, men still wear them as fashion statements. In that respect, the cowboy hat never became truly feminized. While the origins of the hat are disingenuous to the reality of Western labor, the symbolism of America and patriotism have stayed largely consistent for the last 100 years or so. Prevalence of country music, agritourism, and cowboy media have lended positive staying power to the cowboy hat, but some other hats have not been so lucky.
You take your fedora, obviously.
While the cowboy hat has been adopted by women as a fashion statement by the late 20th century, in the 1930s, the Stetson Company began marketing directly to women, not with the cowboy hat, but with the fedora. And it should be to no surprise of anyone that I do not own a fedora in my collection. In Ahead of Fashion, Hats of the 20th Century, Dilys E. Blum of the Philadelphia Museum of Art recounts how controversial female adoption of this mass-produced men's style was, because fedoras at the time were, men's hats. In her autobiography, Always in Vogue, for example, former Vogue editor Edna Woman Chase wrote that a fedora called Amazon, which appeared in an advertisement for Camel cigarettes in about 1932, had distinction, but despite its flattering quality, it had undeniably an air of masculinity, and the ring of lesbianism rent the air and the fashion press. So what made the fedora so popular among women at the time? In the 1930s, the suit was becoming essential female dress. Not the pantsuit, which would come later thanks to Yves Saint Laurent, but the skirt suit. The skirt suit was a feminized, tailored look that was still borrowed from menswear, and so naturally, women also borrowed and feminized the fedora as well. Feminized versions of the fedora frequently featured rich colors, tipped brims, and a somewhat high, close-fitting tapered crown, which was often finished at an angle. The choice of the fedora for Stetson's foray into women's wear was calculated. While the company entered the women's fedora industry in 1930, and while the hat was mostly worn by men, the fedora was actually first introduced to fashion in 1882 as a costume detail for a female stage character. The word fedora was introduced to American English in 1887 from Fedora, a popular play by Victorien Sardou that opened 1882, in which the heroine, a Russian princess named Fedora Romanov, originally was performed by Sarah Bernhardt. During the play, Bernhardt, a notorious cross-dresser, wore a center-creased, soft-brimmed hat. Women's rights activists adopted the fashion. A 1901 spring issue of Eaton's catalog advertised a fine wool felt fedora as a ready-to-wear ladies' hat at the reasonable price of 85 cents and with the modern convenience of mail order. Over time, these feminist associations with the fedora waned as the hat style became more and more popular in menswear. According to American Costume, a source book for the stage costumer by Shirley O'Donnell, the fedora was the everyday hat for the everyman during the First World War. The fedora, or felt hat, with rolled brim and fairly wide hat band, was standard for daytime or business wear. The more conservative or elegant man might wear a derby. In fashion in the time of the Great Gatsby, costume designer and historian Leloni Lemon describes how ubiquitous fedoras and their straw counterparts Panama hats were as a year-round staple accessory. Men always wore hats, and hats followed the seasons in both materials and styles. The favorite hat in the 1920s was the soft felt fedora with a snap brim and pinched crown, made in felt for winter and Panama straw for summer. By the post-World War II period, the silk high hat that we associate with like Abraham Lincoln was only worn in the most formal occasions, and styles like the derby were relegated to daytime formal or semi-formal events. By the 1960s, as the era of ubiquitous hat wearing was coming to a close, the high hat and derby all but disappeared, leaving the fedora as the omnipresent style. Just as cowboys became a heroic archetype through lowbrow pop culture, dime novels, and Wild West stage shows and silent pictures, so did detectives in their fedoras and trench coats. Similarly, antisocial and masculine, brooding detective characters were popular protagonists in early 20th century pulp fiction and radio drama. As a symbol of masculinity, the fedora's inception as a masculine costume for an actress mirrors how the cowboy hat made its stake in culture as an element of costuming in Buffalo Bill's stage shows. Reaching their height of popularity between 1920s and 1950s, fedoras were featured heavily and have become heavily associated with Prohibition-era organized crime, film noir, and jazz. Iconic fedora wearers from this era of prominence include Humphrey Bogart, Al Capone, and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. While these men may have adopted the fedora style due to its no-fuss masculine images, their alpha male personalities also worked to cement that tough guy image for the fedora. In The Fedora, the Statement of an Era, Peter Eliopoulos makes the argument that the ubiquity of the fedora, which was worn by every kind of man from Capone to Roosevelt, is precisely why the hat came to be associated with crime and intrigue. Detective stories and pulp novels and film noir were lowbrow entertainment aimed at average male consumers. Costuming these leading men in the relatable fedora hat allowed audiences to better identify with these protagonists. Common men could purchase and wear a fedora in efforts to romanticize their lives and imagine themselves as the same detective protagonist they watched at the movies. With this background, it makes sense that the fedora's brand of cool yet relatable macho-ness would appeal to young men forming their identities and seeking belonging. Yet, in the past several years, the fedora has come to signify not a Chad, but a cringy milady guy. Know Your Meme dates one of the earliest recorded instances of fedora shaming back to a 2009 entry in a men's fashion blog, Cool or Tool, the Fedora. Multiple Facebook groups and Tumblr blogs focused on mocking fedora wearers were created in 2011 and 2012 with names like Take That Fedora Off, You Look Like a Tool, and Lonely Nerds in Fedoras. In 2014, the story of a fedora-wearing e-stalker was posted to Tumblr by a female Hot Topic employee, later going viral on the Reddit page Just Neckbeard Things. This seems to be a major turning point in fedora derision. While earlier fedora shaming mocked pretension and the poor execution of men wearing vintage headwear, over time the fedora became closely associated with neckbeards or unattractive, misogynistic internet users. I talked to my friend Maya, known by her moniker Broy Deschanel, and her theory is that this negative development might have happened through band kid cringe. Many high school band members were drawn to vintage jazz aesthetics, at least at our high schools, adopting the fedora hat to complete their look. But as most of us know from either our own experience or through 2000s high school media, band kids are often aligned with geekiness and cringe, derogatory, thus tainting the reputation of the fedora among young people. It's also possible that the fedora was just unfairly picked as the decade's scumbag hat. Rebecca Jennings wrote about the scumbag hat, which is a hat that is worn by a type of obnoxious man. She cites the fedora as an example, as well as the trucker hat in the 90s, worn by the dude who you talked to for a few pleasant minutes until he flew into a rage after you mentioned you find Ashton Kutcher insufferable, and the more recent beanie, worn plopped on just the very tip of the head. This beanie look signifies to all who cross his path that the wearer is the type of guy who will throw you up text only to leave you on red the night after. I would argue that today, in Brooklyn, where I live, the rolled beanie, the tiny one that sits just above the ears, has had a bit of a scumbag reputation, representing womanizing skaters and DJs who are snobby about their coffee orders. While not everyone wearing this headgear is a scumbag by default, maybe our negative biases prioritize remembering the scumbags we know when we see a type of hat. Whatever the case may be, the fedora has become one of the Western world's most controversial hats. In 2016, David Allegretti studied the social ramifications of fedora wearing in his Vice article, "I wore a fedora for a week to see if it would ruin my life." He writes, "I began to wonder why people hate fedoras so much. I mean, they're just hats, right? Yet it was already having way more of an impact on my life than nearly anything else I tried." On the opposite side of the spectrum from the fedora is a hat that is so uncontroversial it's basically invisible. A lot of people don't even register that they wear this kind of hat when they declare boldly that they do not wear hats. Originally a hat designed to protect sportsmen from the summer sun, the baseball cap has become a fashion icon and a billboard for identification. Baseball caps are actually a relatively new invention. The round top design with a long visor was introduced around 1900, 60-something years after the invention of baseball. The first official baseball team, the New York Knickerbockers, formed in 1845, played with straw hats in the early days. Tom Schieber, senior curator for the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, theorizes that the hats weren't solely protective headgear, though. He says, "I think it was especially important during the early days of baseball, amateur baseball, when it was truly a club sport. It shows that you're a member of the club. When I'm on the field, I can't show you my membership card. That doesn't work particularly well. But if I'm running around with this outfit on that we've agreed to, oh, then that guy is on the club." Many teams experimented with their hat designs. For instance, in the 1860s, the New York Mutuals and Brooklyn Excelsiors wore merino caps topped with a star-like pattern. This hat was known as the number one. And Spalding's Baseball Guide from 1888 features 10 different cap designs for the sport, including the Chicago cap, one of the most popular big league styles in the late 1880s, and the jockey-shaped cap, which was patterned after caps worn in the horse racing circuit. Aaron Sharp, the managing director of Peck & Snyder, which is one of the oldest New York sporting goods companies, spent a lot of time delving into the brand's archives and couldn't exactly figure out why straw hats phased out in favor of visored hats. But he assumes it was for practical purposes. He theorizes if the players were in straw caps, this is just a guesstimation, but if they're using a bat and if you've got a straw hat with a rim all the way around, it probably got caught, or it might have been blinding for the fielder or something to that effect. The first big league club to put their team monograms on their caps was the Boston Baseball Club in 1894, now known as the Atlanta Braves. The advent of television, the first major league game was telecast on August 26, 1939, brought a whole new audience to the sport and precipitated a rush of uniform redesigns and team relocations. By 1945, every team was wearing its own branded hat. Nowadays, baseball hats are worn both on and off the field, sold by sporting companies and by high fashion houses alike. But unlike other men's hats that were coming out of fashion as the 20th century progressed, the baseball cap didn't become contemporary wear until the late 1970s. According to James Lillifer's book, Ball Cap Nation, a number of factors contributed to the cap's increased legitimacy, including the explosion of television sports, the maturation of the first generation of Little League retirees, and the impact of fictional fashion icon Tom Selleck of Magnum P.I. So not only do baseball caps signify team allegiance, they're also a symbol of American values, which can also be exported abroad. As Troy Patterson writes for the New York Times, to wear a New York Yankees cap in the United States is to show support for the team. Maybe. Or to invest in the hegemony of an imperial city. Not what I'm wearing this for. To wear one abroad, the Yankees model is by far the best-selling Major League Baseball cap in Europe and Asia, is to invest in an idealized America, a phenomenon not unlike pulling on contraband blue jeans in the old Soviet Union. So how did the baseball cap become a representation of Americanism? Baseball was a national game, but also the hats were cheaply made and affordable to multiple classes. As to why it's not as American forward as the cowboy hat, my guess is that the cowboy hat is less accessible and ostentatious, whereas the baseball cap is more casual, therefore more wearable on a daily basis. The cowboy hat also harks back on historical, rugged American tradition, whereas the baseball cap is a symbol of childhood nostalgia, accessible to both urban and rural residents alike. Regardless, because of the Americanness that baseball caps represent, there's also been cases where people have worn them to revolt against the mainstream. For example, in the early 1960s, radicalized white college boys wore the baseball cap backwards as a challenge to WASP privilege and preppiness. And starting in the 1970s, Black people in the hip-hop subculture wore the baseball cap backwards, sideways, and supersized as a badge of defiance, a symbol of alienation from a society that they could neither escape nor join. In the 90s, they sometimes left the price tags on the caps to show admirers that their hats were not counterfeit and as new as the money that bought them. And from then on, we've seen baseball caps continue to be worn for their original purpose at sports games, as well as on the streets of New York and the runways of Paris. The hat transcended into high fashion spaces along with other sportswear motifs and streetwear influences, though exorbitant price tags separate the everyday man from the Kendall Roys of the population. With this kind of chokehold the baseball cap has had on the culture, it is unsurprising that it has come to be an easy way to make profit. In gas stations, museum gift shops, amusement parks, country clubs, corporate offices, and school campuses, you can find a baseball cap representing its establishment just about anywhere. In 2006, Bill Clinton wore a cap from the members-only Shady Canyon Country Club. Seinfeld creator Larry David has been seen in one from Amanyara, an ultra-expensive resort. And on the day he filed his famous report, former special counsel Robert Mueller wore a rare muted grayish cap from the California coastal community Sea Ranch. But again, the cap can be worn in a subversive way. Its low cost allows virtually anyone with an eBay account to buy symbols of an elite culture that you would never actually be a part of, in the same way that anyone could theoretically find and wear a Yale University sweatshirt at a thrift shop. Brand director of Grailed, Lauren Schlossman, told Vox, while almost every garment in the history of clothing has been created to serve a very clear utility, as clothing has modernized, now hats are real estate. It's a billboard and signage for the wearer to actually say something about themselves or their personality. I feel like when I wear my Regency bonnet, it's attention-seeking because of its sheer size, but can also read as being a fashion girly or historical costume enthusiast. And when I wear my camo Yankees baseball cap, I look like an Ethel Cain stan. And when I wear my 1920s knit hat, I bring a sort of Ebenezer Scrooge vibe to the Christmas party that Bob Cratchit sympathizers don't really like.
All right, sleep tight.
Good night.
Good night. I'll see you in the morning.
Okay, no one slander me. I am a Bob Cratchit sympathizer. So to circle back to my position that hats are amazing, I decided to post a question on my Instagram stories to see why many hat haters have abstained from this fashionable piece of headgear. As an aside, I think a lot of people will still wear beanies or other winter wear headgear, but for mostly weather protective reasons and less to make like a fashion statement. Most people who answered said that hats were ill-fitting, that they couldn't get their hairstyles to work with a hat, and actually a few people said, interestingly enough, that in their community it's still rude to wear a hat indoors, and so we have that cumbersome element again of having to like put on, take off a hat, which I did mention before, but it also gives you like really bad hat hair, so I can understand like if you know you're going to go to a place where you have to take off your hat, then you're just going to like not wear a hat. I actually looked up why men are expected to take off hats indoors in Western culture, and I couldn't really find any origin story other than all these etiquette books just saying that it's like impolite. This person on the Ask Historians Reddit page said that men's hats were once considered outerwear like coats, and for the same reason you would take off your coat, you would take off your hat too. And keeping outerwear garments on indicates to the host that you are not accepting their hospitality, which indicates like, impoliteness. The problem of fit, like many things, is a consequence of the fast fashion industry. Back in the day when you went to a milliner, you'd get a custom hat that fit your head. Nowadays, fashion operates on a one-size-fits-all basis for accessories. So most of my hats are vintage, but this bicorn Napoleon-esque hat is one that I actually got made for me by a milliner. And honestly, I got this commission because I was looking forever for a bicorn hat on the market. I didn't care if it was vintage. I didn't want it to be like a Napoleon costume hat, like a hat that was like specifically made to be a costume hat, because I find that a lot of costume hats are kind of like poorly constructed because they're not made to really be worn a lot and through like, different weather conditions or whatever. They're like just for Halloween. So I reached out on Instagram. I like posted my stories. I was like, please, are there like any milliners willing to work with me? And so I met Claire through Instagram and she created this hat. It's custom to my size because like I had to take my head measurements and I got to choose the fabric and we worked together on some of the little finishing details like this little tassel and this brooch, which is actually removable because it's pinned on, which is really cool. And something that she added to this hat is an extra tassel. You can kind of like wear it like this and have two tassels, or you can wear it with two tassels on one side, or you can wear it as I did earlier today with just like one tassel showing. You can also hide both tassels. It's very custom friendly, which I really like. And I definitely in the future am probably going to look into getting more custom made hats because it's just like the easiest problem to fix if you can't find a hat that fits you. And then the issue with like hairstyles, I feel like it really comes down to like lack of variety on the market because throughout the early 20th century, women absolutely styled their hair in extremely time-intensive ways. I used to do it more often, but I've kind of fallen off out of laziness, but you can easily find some hat that could perch on any kind of hairdo you chose for the day. And some hats, like the 1920s cloche hat, were designed to specifically accommodate the common hairdo of the time, which were short bobs and finger waves. My friend Annabelle thinks there's a fear barrier to entry with hats because we've been conditioned to not wear them for so long, so it might feel unnatural to put one on. And granted, a lot of people did write in and said they had like sensory issues, which is totally fair. Admittedly, I think when you put on a hat, you are agreeing to drawing attention to yourself in ways that a lot of people might not feel comfortable with. Whereas in the early 20th century, the reverse was true. Not wearing a hat would draw attention. At the end of the day, I don't really care if people wear hats or if they don't wear hats, but I think it's interesting how a piece of clothing that was once so ubiquitous is now considered like a statement piece. And I'm also just interested always in the changing of meanings over certain clothes over time. So thanks for sticking around with me today, listening to me talk about this really not important but important to me subject. I hope you had fun, and let me know in the comments which of the hats that I wore you like the most, and if you have like a personal reason for why you like or don't like to wear hats. Yeah, okay. Anyways, thank you all so much. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Celia obviously thinks it's a real champagne cocktail of a hat. Here's to it.